morning, everyone. Thank you for coming today. This year, multiple natural disasters have hit the United States, leaving billions of dollars in damages across a large swath of land. Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria have dominated the headlines. As Americans monitor television and online reports of hurricanes, there's little attention on the deadly and destructive fires across the West that have torched 8.5 million acres, nearly 4 times the landmass of Puerto Rico. This is sending millions of tons of carbon into the atmosphere in massive smoke plumes that have closed schools, killed livestock, and created serious health issues for people living near and far from these fires. We have set a new record this year in fire suppression costs that broke the old record in 2015, that broke the previous record in 2012, that broke the previous record set in 2006. There is a pattern here, yet we fail to act. Forests continue to grow, disease and insect infestations continue to spread, fuel loads increase, temperatures rise, humidity drops, and fires continue to explode in unmanaged forests. As a result, the Forest Service is forced to raid its management accounts in order to pay for firefighting costs. This is a practice known as fire borrowing. This leads to less management, which fosters more frequent and intense fires, and simply put, this is unsustainable. It's time for Congress to wake up and address the crisis that continues to burn as we speak. I'm calling on Congress to pass the Resilient Federal Forest Act of 2017. While ending fire borrowing, this bill gives the Forest Service the tools it needs to actively and scientifically manage our forests. There is no downside to a healthy forest. Healthy forests clean the air, they filter water, they improve wildlife habitat, enhance plant and animal biodiversity, create scenic landscapes, and can be an economic driver in rural communities through multiple uses, including sport, recreation, and timber production. I thank you for being here, and I'll take questions momentarily, but I want to move on to my colleagues who are gathered here with me today, who will say a few words. And at the end of that, we'll take questions. Next, I want to introduce the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, someone who knows a lot about fires because they've been affecting his district tremendously this year. I'd like to welcome Greg Walden to the stage.
Thank you, Bruce. Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to join you this morning. I appreciate your leadership on that and with the other members of the Western Caucus and those of us who have had to endure this terrible tragedy all summer. Summer after summer, our valleys are choked with smoke, our forests go up in fire, carbon's emitted into the atmosphere, other pollutants, and people suffer. And then we don't go in after these fires and do the restoration work that needs to be done to plant a new, healthy, green, growing forest. Scientific studies by the Forest Service prove that healthy green forests sequester carbon, they clean up our atmosphere, and frankly, we'd all rather look at those than dead, dying forests that continue to fall over and decay. Dr. John Bailey yesterday from Oregon State University's Forestry School testified for the Energy and Commerce Committee about the health impacts on air quality. This is something I think the Forest Service needs to pay more attention to when they make decisions on how intensively to fight fire. He said, when you talk about overstocking a forest, that in parts of the landscape in eastern Oregon, there are 1,000 trees per acre, where naturally there should be 20. Now you think about that for a minute. 1,000 trees per acre where there should be 20. We need this bill passed so that we can go in and have our professional scientific foresters do their work to get back in balance with nature. So we can protect our watersheds, so we can not have unhealthy air sheds, and so that we can replant after these forest fires. I want to commend the Trump administration for yesterday putting in their request to Congress $576.5 million to help replenish the funds for the Forest Service that they've had to rob from other accounts once again this year to fight fire. In my state, more than 678,000 acres have burned this year alone. Fire came so close to my small hometown that we were on an evacuation level halfway into town. One fire in the Columbia Scenic Gorge burned 14 miles across the hillside in one night. This stuff is every bit as bad for the country as the hurricanes have been, as tornadoes are, as floods are. It's just it happens in the West. We had schools that had to cancel because it was too smoky to have kids in the classroom. 30th anniversary of Cycle Oregon, canceled. 9 Shakespearean Festival plays at $400,000 loss, canceled. Virtually anything outdoors had to be canceled, not just for a day. We're dealing with this for months at a time. Congress needs to act, give us the tools through the resilient forest legislation so we can do landscape-sized treatments, reduce catastrophic fire, get back in balance with nature. And just in closing, this is what is left behind after the fires. To really enjoy what we've had to deal with all summer, I should open this up and spread it out into the ventilation system, because that's what happens at home. This has to end. We need to pass legislation to fix fire borrowing. We need to make sure that our foresters have the tools they need so that our citizens don't have to breathe the ash and debris that's fallen all summer long. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Next, I would like to call to the podium the chairman of the Republican House Conference from the state of Washington, Kathy McMorris-Rogers.
Thank you, Bruce. I'm proud to represent a beautiful district in eastern Washington where we enjoy the great outdoors regularly. It's also a district that unfortunately we have seen devastating wildfires, larger and larger catastrophic wildfires every year. And you know, I think most people in the country, when they think of forest, they think, you know, they know that the Forest Service owns a lot of land. You know, it's nearly 200 million acres that the Forest Service owns in America. What people imagine is that these are green, healthy trees, well managed, well cared for. But you know what? It's actually the opposite. If people actually saw the condition of these forests, I believe they'd be outraged, because what they would see is that these are forests full of bug-infested, diseased, dying trees. 1 out of 3 acres within the Forest Service is dead, diseased, bug-infested trees. We need action. And unfortunately, what happens is every year we're borrowing more money from the Forest Service to actually fight the fire. So it's just having a double negative impact, because the very money that we want to dedicate to caring for these forests is used to fight the fires. So I'm proud to join in supporting efforts here on Capitol Hill, raising the awareness so that people understand how devastating these fires are to our communities. The fact that it's not just the forests themselves, but then also the impact on our air quality. This summer again, people in Spokane were told, don't go outside because the air quality is so bad if you can stay inside. And just that is, it's really it's almost a scary thought when there's no place to go to get clean air because the fires that are burning. So we need to take action. It has reached crisis, and I am proud to stand and join efforts both for better forest management and addressing the fire borrowing that needs to be addressed this Congress.
Thank you, Kathy. We've now having joined us is the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee from the state of Utah, Rob Bishop.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you for your leadership on this. Look, I don't think there's anything more that hasn't already been said, so let's just say it right now. The biggest problem of pollution in our atmosphere comes from forest fires. The biggest threat to endangered species like sage-grouse comes from fires. If we don't get a control on this, not only in the forest but also on our BLM lands, we will never have a decent environment, we will never be able to meet our goals, and we will always be in the backlog. And I'm sorry, we have a solution right now. The solution to help our forests become healthy again is here before us. The solution to actually bringing down the cost of wildfires is before us. If we don't do the reforms, we will never actually get a hold on the costs of wildfires. So the problem is, we know what the solution is, we've got to do it. Now is the time to do it. We cannot wait another season. So the House has a bill that moves us forward significantly. The Senate needs to pick it up, and we're going to be working with the Senate to make sure it happens, because this is the solution. We have a problem, we know the way out of it, now is the time to do it. We cannot put this off another year. So I appreciate Ms. Westman's bill. I appreciate all my friends back here who've done so much to move this issue and to make sure that it is positive. Now's the time we push it over the line, and it has to be now. First.
Thank you, Chairman. We appreciate your leadership, and we passed this bill out of the House at least the past 2 years, and we really need to get it across the finish line in the Senate. Next up, from the state of Montana, is someone who's experienced a lot of forest fires in their state this year. Please welcome Greg Giaforte.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you for your leadership on this. Who better than a forester to write the Resilient Federal Forest Act? I'm proud to be a co-sponsor with you, and I'm very pleased to be the sole voice for Montana back here in the U.S. House of Representatives. We did have a catastrophic fire year this year. We burned over 1.2 million acres in Montana alone. This is the equivalent of the state of Delaware, blackened. We lost the lives of 2 forest firefighters in that fight. In my own driveway, we experienced ash falling on the cars daily. We had teachers handing out masks to students so they could even come to school. We had livelihoods threatened. We had rangeland consumed. These catastrophic fires are the direct result of us not managing our forests. When we do manage our forests, we have healthier forests, there's more habitat, there's more wildlife, we have jobs for Montanans, and fires are less severe. I've seen it myself on the ground. When fires in unmanaged forest burn through, every tree is killed. When the fire reaches a managed forest, the fire drops into the undergrowth, the fire behavior change radically, and the fires are quickly extinguished. We need to get back to managing our forests. We can't do anything about the weather, but we can manage our forests. That's why I'm proud to co-sponsor this bill with you, Bruce. And again, thank you for your leadership.
Thanks, Greg. Now, from the state of Arizona and the chairman of the Western Caucus, someone who's been a huge advocate for better forest management, Paul Gosar.
Thanks, Bruce. Well, people think Arizona and forests. Well, in my 4 terms as a congressman in Arizona, I've had to mitigate the largest fire in Arizona history and the most catastrophic in terms of human life, the Yarnell fire, which 19 firefighters died. If you really want to take a look at what's going on, it's in movie form right now in movie theaters around the country. So go see what is actually being hit with us out west. You know, one of the key components that's been brought up is we want to thank OMB Director Mick Mulvaney for backfilling some of the funds into the fire suppression area and helping us mitigate some of the problems that have been happening in a catastrophic year. But he also asked for reforms. And I want to just give you a couple of these aspects of reform. These are common sense reforms that Congressman Westerman is looking for. It empowers local stakeholders and decision makers to be part of it. It empowers tribal communities who have been impeccable about how they maintain their forests. It requires litigants not to say no, but what's going to take to be yes. So redirecting some of those funds that would be causing the stalling of a project to actually come forward. There are so many proper aspects of common sense science that are applied here. I don't know about you. I know these folks here are very tired of seeing the victimization of the people back out in the West. Time's short. Well, Arizona was lucky this year. We started down the pathway of catastrophic fires, but we're blessed with some rain. But we're sitting on a tinderbox. Let's not make it happen again. Let's pass this. As Bruce said before, we've passed this before in the House. As everybody knows, Democrats may be the opposition. By the way, this is bipartisan. But the Senate is always the enemy. So let's put the pressure on the Senate. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and again for the leadership that the Western Caucus has taken on this issue. Another person who's very familiar with wildfires because they affect his district from the state of Idaho, Raul Labrador.
Thank you, Bruce, for your leadership. Thank you, Chairman Bishop, and everyone else who's here. Idahoans have endured another summer of disastrous fires. Valuable timber has been destroyed, watersheds damaged, and public health has been threatened. For the second time in 3 years, the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality was forced to issue a statewide burning ban. Air quality reached hazardous levels, forcing people to stay indoors, the cancellation of school activities, including high school football games. My kids couldn't play football for several days because of these fires. The tragedies that Congress has known better While 2017 was the most expensive wildfire season in history, 2015 was the worst, measured by acres burned. Recognizing the ongoing threat, the House passed the Resilient Federal Forest Act in 2016. Unfortunately, as has been explained again and again and again, the Senate failed to take it up. They failed to act on this bill. We cannot wait any longer. The House should quickly pass this bill to restore multiple use management and send it to the Senate. Failure to act guarantees one thing: more catastrophic fires in the West and less health and less healthy forests. Let's get this bipartisan bill to the House floor and let's move it to the Senate for action. And thank you again for your leadership on this issue.
Thank you, Raul. Got a couple of members from the great state of California coming up to talk, and everybody knows that they've seen their fair share of wildfires out there. First off is Doug Lamoffa.
Thank you, Bruce. You know, in my own district, Northern California, just in my district, the number is approaching 183,000 acres burned. This has to happen just about every year, it seems. 250,000 a couple of years ago. And when are we going to do something real about this? And when are we going to get beyond that this is just big timber or big lumber interests that want to do this? This is actually a big part of an environmental problem as well. So what do we have going? I borrowed Mr. Walden's prop here, the ash. This stuff here is not only in the air, but it's also getting into the streams, into the brooks, into the creeks, into the rivers, into the lakes, and affecting negatively water quality, big time. And so what is that going to do for the habitat? Fish spawning zones, ruined for a long time. The erosion you get from hillsides that no longer have trees and other cover that keep the soil in place. Instead, it makes it that much harder to grow back trees and other cover in subsequent years. So you want to talk about the environmental problem, which is what we always hear about when you need to go in and do salvage immediately after fire, and it's delayed for a year and a half, like happened in Siskiyou County a couple of years ago, for a measly 4% of the recovery of the acres there for the salvage. What kind of game are we playing here? We're killing the environment, we're killing the small towns, we're killing the Indian tribe areas where they, in these fire zone years, up to 18 times above the action level of air quality that people in these poorer communities or some of these areas have really no other opportunity to live somewhere else, to go somewhere else. This is the legacy we're leaving here when the Forest Service doesn't manage its land. You can fly over and see after a fire, just 3 or 4 years later, private land is starting on its way to recovery. New trees, green and planted on their way. And the old snags on the federal land, brush growing back, becoming the next tinderbox problem just a few years later. We need to do something about this for the people's quality, for the air quality, the water quality, the habitat. Look at the wildlife that's being decimated out there. There's a very graphic photo of a mountain lion burned alive in a tree. Is this what it takes to wake people up to what we need to be doing? That's why Mr. Westerman's bill makes a heck of a lot of sense for the resilient forests that we once had in this country, where now timber activity has been reduced up to 75% on the number of board feet that need to be taken out, because those forests are still growing every single day. Every single day. More board feet are coming in. We're falling farther and farther behind. I commend Mr. Mulvaney and the OMB for putting forward $576 million, so we'll continue to fight the fire suppression, but also the administration wanting to act administratively as well to push forward reform while we do the legislation to authorize this. So I'm optimistic and hopeful that this will be the year. Mr. John Forte's district, my colleague Mr. McClintock to the south of me, around Yosemite, the hundreds of thousands and millions of acres really that are being decimated each year due to lack of action. So we need to move in this area. We need to move rapidly so we can have these tools in place to do a much better job of managing the people's asset. Thank you. With that, I'll bring up my colleague, Mr. Tom McClintock, who's fought this issue very, very hard and has done that all up and down the eastern Sierra of California. Tom?
Thank you, Doug. I represent the Sierra Nevada of California, where we've lost more than 1,100 square miles of forest land to catastrophic fire just in the last 5 years. There's an old adage, excess timber is going to come out of the forest one way or the other. It's either carried out or it burns out, but it comes out. When we carried it out, we had healthy, resilient, thriving forests, and we had thriving mountain community economies. About 45 years ago, we imposed a series of laws that has made the scientific management of our forests virtually impossible. We've seen an 80% decline in excess timber harvested out of the Sierra Nevada and a concomitant increase in catastrophic fire. Trees that once had plenty of room to grow healthy and strong are now fighting for their lives against other trees trying to occupy the same ground. In that stressed condition, they can no longer resist factors such as drought, disease, pestilence, and ultimately fall victim to catastrophic wildfire. In the Sierra National Forest, it's estimated about 95% of the pine stock is now dead. We are losing our forests. These laws were imposed with the promise that they would improve the forest environment. After 45 years of experience with these laws, I think we're entitled to ask, how is the forest environment doing? The answer is damning. These laws not only failed to improve our forest environment, they have done catastrophic harm to that environment. The Westerman Resilient Federal Forests Act is the first step in restoring scientific management to our public lands. It has been passed before by the House, only to die a quiet death in the Senate, and more forest land is lost. We are running out of time because we are running out of forests. The House will act this year once again, and now the Senate must act. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And I'll mention that Tom's the chairman of the Federal Land Subcommittee and Resources, and there's since I've been in Congress, there's been no more vocal advocate for protecting our forests than Tom. And finally, we've got another gentleman from the state of Washington who knows the land, he knows farming, and he knows timber. And please welcome Dan Newhouse.
Thank you, Bruce. Bruce represents America's original West. It's a pleasure to stand here with you. Thank you, Mr. Bishop, for your support in moving this important legislation forward, critical legislation that's tremendously important to so many communities in the western part of the United States. You've heard a lot of numbers. 8 million acres, over 8 million acres have burned this year. Over 80 million acres are ready to go up in smoke at any time. In my own central Washington district, we have had record-setting fires. The Carlton Complex of 2014 was the largest wildfire we ever had in the state of Washington. It was outdone in 2015 by the Okanagan fire, during which, unfortunately, we lost 3 firefighters. Now, besides the statistics, let me just tell you that this is an ongoing thing. This is happening right now. This is real. This is impacting communities throughout not only my district, but throughout the West. We've lost property. We've lost livestock. We've lost precious timber resources. And like I said, we have lost human lives because of the catastrophic wildfires that continue to get worse and worse. You know, the smoke that hangs in the low parts of the areas as thick as fog lasts and lasts for weeks and months at a time. Just to give you an example, when I was home for the August recess, I developed a cough that I just could not shake until I came back to Washington, D.C. to breathe the fresh air of Washington. And I was not alone. Many of my friends and neighbors are experiencing the health impacts of these forest fires on top of the real property losses. As you know, these are not events that last hours or days. These last months. And it truly is. They're drawn out processes, and the impacts are drawn out as well. So the time is now to act. We've been talking about this for as long as I've been in Washington, D.C. The solutions are before us. The support is here. It's a bipartisan effort. And we are committed to getting this passed in the House and committed to working with the Senate so that we can finally put an end to this tragedy that continues to happen on an annual basis. Again, thank you, Mr. Bishop, Mr. Westerman, and everyone that's supporting this effort. This is something we have to do now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you to all my colleagues that joined me. Some of them have had to go on to other meetings. Dan made a very surreal point there. When the air in D.C. is cleaner than it is in the West, we know we've got issues there. But now we'll take some questions if anyone has questions. John?
Yeah, Congressman Gosar, you mentioned that the Senate is kind of always the enemy, and you guys have all kind of talked about how this is really critical for Western states. How do you make the case in the Senate, knowing that there's all these other states that are east of the Rockies that really don't feel the same personal connection to this issue? How do you make the case to them that this needs to pass? This can't be another year that it stalls in the Senate.
Well, the case may, we're part of the United States, and this is a natural catastrophe that's man-made. And so they have an obligation to the office to learn and walk a mile in my moccasins, just like we do for them, whether it be a hurricane, whether it be a tornado or a natural disaster. So it's not an if, it's a must. And we have an open invitation. As chairman of the Western Caucus, we've had a number of opportunities for members that are not maybe knowing the great ideas and the Western problems to come out and join us, and actually we'll show it to you. Because once you see it, that's why I implore most of our Senate colleagues to go see the Arnell 19. Watch when a firefighter is burned up and doesn't have a chance. Watch when you're helpless to see these fuel loads. This is man-made, and so there's no excuse. Where I call on is it takes leadership. Show me the leadership.
If I can add to that, I'm from Arkansas. Got over 2 million acres of the Ouachita and Ozark National Forest in my district. That really, we have wildfires there, but not to the extent that happens out west. But when these fires out west are sucking the funds out of the Forest Service budget, that means we can't do management on the forest back in Arkansas. And the other federal lands in the east, they all suffer when all the management money is going to fight fires in the west. So this does affect the whole country. And if you look at the smoke maps, the smoke actually covers most of the country at some point in time when these fires are burning. Frank?
Congressman, this is something that's burning up the West, but if I'm looking at the list right, you don't have any Democratic co-sponsors west of Minnesota. Why aren't Democrats getting on board with this?
Well, we're talking to some of those members now. Last time it was brought up in the House, we had over 20 Democratic members vote for the bill, and we're working with them, trying to find tweak any issues they may have that would get more Democratic co-sponsors on the bill. But I believe we'll see even more Democrats vote for it this time when it's on the floor than we saw last year.
Well, let me follow up. Congressman Simpson has introduced legislation to overhaul the way the funding's done so that more money can be shifted over to management as opposed to fighting the fires. It has, I think, 36 Democratic co-sponsors. What's the argument for not moving that bill forward, since it's got Democratic and Republican broad support, apparently?
It's a great question. That bill addresses the fire borrowing, but it doesn't address the management component. So the Resilient Federal Forest Act addresses both the fire borrowing and the management component. And the fix that we've got in this bill involves FEMA and adjusting the disaster caps in FEMA. Same thing would have to happen with the Simpson bill. We're working with Mike and other members, looking at the best solution on the fire fix. But if we want to really address the issue, we have to have the management component in it. If we just fix the fire borrowing, then we're putting a Band-Aid on the symptom instead of addressing the real problem.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Just what would you say to, there's been some criticism that this is a sellout to the timber industry.
That's laughable. The timber industry has been virtually destroyed in the West. A lot of the production has moved to the South. And if you look at the timber production in this country and the amount of timber that's being sold, in California and Colorado, and we've had testimony in committee, people saying that the forests are actually dying at a higher rate than they're growing in both California and Colorado, where there's little to no management. But you go to the South, in my state of Arkansas, or go to Georgia. In Arkansas, we're producing 16 million more tons a year of wood than was standing last year. The state of Georgia is 19 million tons more. We have very active management there, and California and Colorado have become net polluters of the environment because of their forests, and it should be just the opposite. With the vast forest lands they got there, they should be cleaning the forest. But it's not a need for wood that's driving management on the forest. There's all this excess fiber in the south and in other places where it can be harvested easily. This is about forest health, and it's about making clean air and clean water and managing an asset that needs to be managed. One of the issues with forest management would be to find markets for the material that needs to come off of the forest, because the infrastructure is simply not there now, and it will take years to build that back so that we can actively manage and have a home for these products that need to come off. And it's not clear cutting. It's coming in and doing things like thinning from below, getting the number of trees down fewer, doing controlled burns, doing vegetation management. That's what we're striving for. So I think it's very disingenuous to say that this is something being pushed by the timber industry because it's really not.
And they just pulled votes, so we'll have to make that our last.
Now let me just add to that as well as the other question, if I could for a second. Look, whether you pay for wildfire damages out of FEMA as is in our bill, or you do it after the Simpson bill, it's really not that big of a difference. We can easily work one way or the other. The issue is, if you don't do the reforms that are in his bill, then it doesn't matter what you spend, you don't solve the problem. All you do is exacerbate the problem. You cannot solve the problem of wildfire burnings and wildfire damage simply by throwing more money at it. You have to have the reforms. And the key element goes to both questions. These are reforms that the Forest Service in the Obama administration worked with us to say these are the things they can do on day one after it's signed by the president. So both the Forest Service under the Obama administration as well as the Trump administration worked with us on coming up with things that are practical and they are doable. And if we don't do these things, the amount of money you spend on wildfires is insignificant, or where it comes from is insignificant. This has to be part of it. Otherwise, you're just spinning your wheels, wasting your time, and not accomplishing any of the goals. So this is a bill, I'm sorry, everyone who knows what they're talking about agrees to it.
If it's a no-brainer, though, why doesn't it pass? I mean, why are people getting in the way?
You're talking about the Senate. You answered your question.
I just offer McClintock's second law of political physics. The more we invest in our mistakes, the less willing we are to admit them. I think that a lot on the left are invested in mistakes that were made 45 years ago that have now led us to this crisis with our national forests, and they simply can't ideologically let go of laws that simply have not only not worked but have been catastrophically counterproductive to their stated objective.
Thank you.
And they've called votes, so we'll wrap up.
All right. Thank you again. Thank you all for being here.